My name is Jake Baxter. It has been a year since the world as I knew it exploded right in front of me. Although, I suppose it's incorrect to say it that way. The world didn't explode by itself. I blew it up, I shattered it around me, and walked away from the destruction. To be fair, I had help. At least 60 swindlers were fully paid. I just lit the fuse. My wife was one of those cheaters, and I took perverse pleasure in destroying everyone along with her. Before my great awakening, I was a happy, unsuspecting husband, in love with my wife and enamored with our life together. Everything was going perfectly. We had been married for almost 5 years and had our own little house with good friends and neighbors I liked, a great job, and supportive families. We were earning more money than we needed to live on and saving for a future that turned out to be entirely different from what we had planned. I wish I could tell you something about us or our marriage that would give this story meaning, but the truth is, I can't find any meaning myself. I married my college sweetheart. She was sweet, kind, and funny. She was loving and gentle. She wasn't the type to constantly flirt with other men. She didn't dress provocatively, and I never doubted her faithfulness to me. I work in a research and engineering laboratory that develops highly specialized electronics for NASA and the military. We jokingly call it Geek Central. The thing about most geeks is that while we handle very complex tasks at work, at home, we are quite simple. What you see is what we are. There are no tricks here because we are not good at them. Many people think prodigies are teenagers. Maybe, by their standards, that's true. We laugh at silly jokes, quote movies and obscure works, and we are fascinated by the details of existence. Whatever sophistication we possess is not highly valued in social circles. On the other hand, we know that if we lose our reputation for speaking the truth, we are done for. Geeks don't lie. Our reputation is our career, and both are built on the truth. My wife, Jeannie, works in high finance at a firm called Watson. They are major players in the financial aspects of large construction projects and seem to have been involved in many of the biggest constructions in the Mid-Atlantic states. The office is downtown, and Jeannie works with a surprisingly uneducated group of people. They understand money, and some can program a spreadsheet, but I must admit that every time I talk to her colleagues, I feel like I'm back in high school. It's the plain truth. Jeannie and I got 2 kittens. They were brothers. We wanted to name them Lewis and Clark. One of her colleagues very seriously said, "That's not bad, but you really should name them after someone famous." Do you see what I mean? They are the cool guys, and I'm the invisible man. Jeannie and her colleagues always go through all the options, and if it's not written down, it doesn't mean anything to them. I never liked it, but I always thought it was just her job, not her values. God, how wrong I was. Where geeks think individually and come together to test their ideas, financiers think collectively. They identify with the group. The only time they think as individuals is when they are looking for the next step and trying to climb the corporate ladder. I disliked many of them, but I didn't actually hate them until the very end. The first unpleasant feeling I had was at the Watson Christmas party. It was held at the Marriott Hotel across the street from my wife's office. Everyone was mingling freely, and half the time, I didn't know if I was talking to an employee or their spouse. Drinks were flowing, and while standing by the bar, I accidentally overheard a woman say to another, "I'll have to get past my work husband before I can do that." It was strange to hear. I wanted to turn around and see who was speaking, but instead, I froze. A quiet voice in my head said, "Stop, listen, don't say anything. Try to be invisible for just a moment." Well, we're all going on vacation next week, but I think it won't last that long. You know, a whole week without crossing the street. Both women laughed. You can always have a small emergency with a work account. This made them both laugh even harder. What did she mean by crossing the street? Did they think they would have to go back to work in the middle of the Christmas party or later? I didn't understand what I had heard, but it troubled me. I remember thinking, God, did I marry the right woman? Whatever they think, it doesn't sound good. Then I allowed myself to forget about it and returned to the party. I didn't think about it again for the next 3 weeks. One Friday evening, I was coming up from our basement on the carpeted stairs when I heard my wife say, "Okay, I'll get right on that. Hey, what's the point of having a wife anyway?" Then she laughed. A wife? What the hell was that? I turned the corner just as Jeannie was hanging up the phone. What does all that mean? I asked. I did my best to say it without a hint of accusation. She nearly jumped. I had surprised her. Oh, that was Henry Thomas. It's about work. I need to go to the office tomorrow, and next week we'll be working late. There's a chance to put together a funding package for a new residential complex they're trying to build on J Street. I remembered the conversation I had overheard at the Christmas party. Sounds like a small emergency with a work account, I said. Jeannie laughed. I don't know if I'd call it an emergency, but it's too good an opportunity to pass up. We've both worked hard this year. I was hoping we could relax a bit this month and spend more time together. Honey, don't be such a stick in the mud. You have to seize these opportunities when they come, or you'll lose them forever. I'll make it up to you. And what's this talk about a wife? I thought you were my wife. How many husbands do you have? A flash of shock crossed her face. She didn't know I had heard her. She tried to cover it with a hasty smile. Just you, silly. It's how we talk in the office. We team up to work on projects and sometimes joke that we see more of our work partners than our husbands and wives at home. It's just our little joke. Everyone says it. Jeannie spoke with confidence, almost to the point of condescension. She smiled, but her hands were trembling. I'll just go in for a few hours tomorrow to get things rolling, and then we'll spend the rest of the weekend together. The rest of Friday evening passed quietly, and Jeannie went to the office on Saturday morning as if it were a regular workday, except for her casual clothes. The rest of the weekend together didn't start until after 7 p.m. on Saturday. Don't get me wrong. I understand hard work and tight deadlines. I just don't like family secrets, and I felt there was much more mystery in my marriage than I had realized. That Saturday, I thought a lot about secrecy while waiting for Jeannie to come home. Even though I always shared stories about my work or things I heard at work with her, I began to realize she never talked to me about her job. It was as if she had two lives, one at work and one at home. I had never noticed before how much she had walled off that part of her life from me. When my wife finally came home on Saturday evening, she went straight to the shower while I grilled steaks. I couldn't stop thinking about that remark in the phone conversation, wife. Even if it was innocent, it made me bristle. I didn't like it one bit. Two phrases from that Christmas party kept echoing in my mind. One was work husband, and the other was crossing the street. Was it meant literally or figuratively? Across the street from Jeannie's office were two buildings. One housed a large medical clinic. The other was the Marriott Hotel. It struck me that many people at that Christmas party seemed remarkably familiar with that hotel. I kept telling myself they probably went there for lunch and hosted out-of-town clients there, but in my foul mood, I kept imagining another scenario. The following week, I decided I needed to get out of the lab and have lunch in my car. During lunch, my car happened to be parked a block up the street from where my wife worked, giving me an excellent view of the street between her office and the Marriott Hotel. What I saw, I didn't like. Around 11:45 a.m. on Monday, just before lunch, I saw about half a dozen pairs, a man and a woman, crossing the street and entering the Marriott Hotel. At about 12:30 p.m., I saw the same pairs returning to their offices. There were no groups of 3 or 4 women gathering for lunch, only pairs. I didn't see my wife among them, but I was not happy. I saw the same thing on Tuesday, different pairs but the same behavior. I knew I couldn't just walk into the Marriott and watch the lobby. Too many people could recognize me, including my wife if she saw me there. I needed help. Never in my wildest dreams or nightmares did I think I would do what I did next. That same day, I hired a private detective named Harvey Madison. I told him what I knew and what I needed to know, and then I gave him a photo of my Jeannie. He told me to do the most impossible thing I could imagine. He said, "Don't think about it. Just go back to your life and act normal. It's probably nothing, and if it's something unpleasant, you'll know soon enough." I told him I really hoped I was wasting my money and then went back to work. I didn't waste my money. On Thursday morning, Harvey met me in his office to deliver the bad news. My wife had entered the lobby of the Marriott Hotel on Wednesday morning at 11:45, with Henry Thomas's arm around her waist. They lingered at the front desk just long enough to get a key and went straight up to the fourth floor. They came back down at almost 12:40. Harvey Madison had a brief and very confidential conversation with the bellhop. My wife and her work husband were regular visitors at the hotel. Harvey's conversation at the front desk cost me $300, and he warned me that it was just the initial payment. I needed ironclad evidence, which meant video footage from inside the room. I hated myself for what I was thinking, but my thoughts about my wife were growing increasingly dark. To get what I wanted, the bellhop had to cooperate with us. Harvey needed to know which room Jeannie and her work husband would use. Then the bellhop would book the same room immediately before and after their next visit, allowing Harvey to install a small video camera in the room. This meant paying for the rental and a bribe. I could afford it, and I paid. The next 7 days were awful. I tried to avoid Jeannie as much as possible, but she kept asking why I was acting so strangely. I simply told her it was work-related, but I doubted I fooled her. She wanted to make love, and I told myself that if I hadn't caught anything venereal yet, I probably wouldn't, so we did it. My heart wasn't in it. My body barely responded. My only emotions were anger and pain. I felt like my marriage was dying, but I still had very little evidence without any explanations. I knew she was cheating, but I tried to convince myself not to judge definitively until we had the video from the room. I needed to see it to be absolutely sure. Harvey called the bellhop, who booked the necessary room for the morning and evening of the following Wednesday. I went to Harvey's office on Thursday morning. Now I had the evidence and the accompanying heartbreak. I watched a 40-minute video of my loving wife, the center of my universe, having sex with her work husband, Henry Thomas. The world as I knew it had come to an end. The geek mind sometimes moves in strange directions. I remembered an old joke about a husband who comes home to find his wife cheating on him. He puts a gun to his head and says to his wife, "Don't laugh. You're next." I promised myself I would handle everything properly. They would pay, and I would walk away satisfied. But before that, I needed to get away for a few days. I couldn't stay in the same house with Jeannie. I talked to my boss and arranged to take leave for the rest of the week. If anyone asked, I was needed in Wallops for the entire weekend. I went home, packed a bag, left a note, and headed west. I had a childhood friend, David, who lived about an hour away from Baltimore, and he agreed to let me stay with him for the weekend. I considered it a blessing that Jeannie and I didn't cross paths while I was home. I didn't know what I would have done, but I wasn't in the right state of mind to act normal. I needed time to think, plan, and, most importantly, calm down. Leaving that note was the first time I had ever lied to my wife. I felt awkward about it, but I needed to leave, and I wasn't going to back down. The drive west gave me some time to think. Did I really know this woman? Was she so good at compartmentalizing her life that she could rationalize having two husbands? One thing I knew for sure, my wife had mistaken trustfulness for stupidity. I was never stupid, and lying to a husband who completely trusts you is not a clever trick. Now, the days of trust were over. My marriage was dead, and all that was left was the funeral. The thing about childhood friends is that they know you completely. They know who you were then, who you are now, and what you're always thinking about. You can't hide from them. My friend read everything on my face within 2 minutes of me stepping into his house. I broke the news to him, and as a good friend should, he got just as angry as I did. Then there was his wife, Marie, who tried to calm both of us down and make us think. She wasn't defending Jeannie in any way. She just wanted me to be sure of what I wanted and not to go off half-cocked. Make no mistake, we need a woman's perspective to truly understand what's happening. While I was angry at my wife and her work husband, her focus was on all the other women working in that office. In her view, it was the women who controlled the sex, and every woman there either participated by their behavior or turned a blind eye to it. She said, "Men are pigs, and it's a woman's job to civilize them." Then she smiled at her husband, who reluctantly agreed. I want to destroy them all. I'm divorcing my wife, that lying, cheating crap. She betrayed me, and obviously not for the first time. But I want to hurt them all. I want to make her Mr. Henry Thomas regret he was ever born with, and I want every crook in that office to regret every day they cross the street to that hotel. Marie tried to reason with me. Make sure you're ready for the consequences. There might be a reason for what happened that you don't know about. Maybe she'll regret her actions so much that she'll never do it again. You love this woman enough to marry her. Do you want to throw all that away now? Think about it. I pulled out the flash drive with the video, and they watched it with me. Henry Thomas was a paper salesman. His job involved money. While I was out running after work, he was dining at fancy restaurants. Henry Thomas was soft. For 40 minutes, we watched as my wife gave herself to her work husband. She was smiling, even laughing, and I was dying inside. Henry Thomas was nothing special. He didn't last long. He wasn't even particularly energetic. All he did was twitch, and she acted like she was in an adult movie. The strange part was that most of the conversation was focused on work. While undressing, they talked about the current project, and later, while dressing, they discussed the schedule for the afternoon. As soon as he recovered from the quick first round, she took him again, riding him for a second time. They didn't use condoms even once. When the video ended, silence filled the room. I turned to Marie and asked, "How long should I think about this?" She just shook her head, hugged me, and went to prepare dinner. My friend David had become a lawyer. His wife teaches science at a middle school. Both have remarkably analytical minds. We talked a lot that weekend, and with their help, I formulated a plan. I called Harvey and told him exactly what I wanted. It was going to be costly, but with patience, it could be done. We decided to divide my wife's office into two groups. There was the management and those who worked closely with Jeannie. This was one group of about 10 people plus their work spouses. I wanted them not just burned, but reduced to ashes. The rest would feel the heat, but I wouldn't spend my money to burn them. Harvey set up cameras in the rooms used by the targeted management and employees. The others would be recorded entering and leaving the hotel lobby. When I was ready to file for divorce, I simultaneously sued the company and shared what I had with the spouses of each of her coworkers. That weekend, I spent a lot of time thinking about whether I had missed any signs. There must have been some signs. She never seemed unloving. She supported me when I described difficulties at work. Could she really live two lives without feeling guilty? Was she a sociopath? Her nervous reaction when I asked about the wife remark that first Friday told me she knew right from wrong, or at least knew her actions could have consequences. I couldn't understand how someone could live two lives without having a nervous breakdown. Sometime during the weekend, it occurred to me that by leaving town, I had given Jeannie and her work husband a perfect opportunity to use our house for their tryst. I thought about it, got angry, and then realized it didn't matter. I was divorcing her regardless of her current actions. I'd leave her the damn bed just in case, and take what I wanted from the rest. I prepared myself for the actions ahead and drove home on Sunday evening. To save some money, we decided not to videotape any of the work spouses in their hotel rooms more than once. The exceptions would be my wife and her Mr. Thomas. This would reduce the costs of booking the rooms, and for Harvey's people, it would only require 2 hours a day. As for Jeannie, I wanted to prevent any claims that it was just once. It only took 2 weeks to get everything I wanted. I hated those weeks. I know some might say, wasn't one time enough? Of course it was, but I wanted revenge on the entire office, everyone who knew my wife was cheating and didn't tell me, and that took a bit more time. Most work spouses seemed to sneak away once a week. Some crossed the street more often, some perhaps less. We didn't catch all of them, but we caught enough for my plans. Jeannie and her work husband kept to a Wednesday schedule. I decided to work late often, but it wasn't enough. It was too painful to be at home. I arranged another emergency trip to Wallops on Thursday, but in reality, I stayed at a hotel near work that night. On Friday evening, I drove west again to visit David and Marie, and then on Monday evening, I stayed at the hotel again. Jeannie began complaining that I was ignoring her, and from my side at least, the relationship had turned cold. She had no idea how frosty it had become. For some reason, she tried to maintain normalcy at home, but I was of little use, and it began to show in her overall behavior. I started sleeping in the guest room and leaving the house early. I could have my own deadlines at work too. Maybe she thought our marriage was in trouble, or maybe she bought my excuses, or maybe she just didn't care. In any case, It didn't stop her from lunching on Wednesdays with her work husband. If anything, their lunch breaks became longer. And as I found out, at least two-thirds of her company's employees were cheating on their spouses, including most of the senior staff. I guess it's true what they say about fish rotting from the head. Months later, I realized that in the 3 videos I watched, they never mentioned me. She didn't badmouth me. She didn't mention me at all, didn't complain about me, and didn't need my protection. She wore her wedding rings, which made me even angrier, but it was as if I didn't exist. I simply didn't factor into this part of her life. There was a sexual tenderness between the two partners, but in a strange sense, there was no real intimacy. They were more than just sex buddies, but less than lovers. I thought my marriage ended that first Wednesday when I saw my wife walk through the lobby, holding her work husband by the waist, and go up to their room. Watching them have sex, I realized there would be no discussions, no excuses, and no cliches. I was ready to destroy my marriage and her entire office along with it. I didn't want to hear her apologies or see her tears. I damn sure didn't want to hear that it was just sex. 3 rendezvous, actually 4, would silence any claims that she loved only me. My lawyer prepared the legal documents, and Harvey took care of everything else. At 10 a.m. on Monday, a special process server walked into the Watson office to serve Jeannie and Henry Thomas at their desks. Then he went into the CEO's office and served the company. It seems almost ironic now, but the CEO of Watson was George Walker, and he was one of the cheaters. George Walker was 67 years old, and he had a trophy wife who was only 29. Why he needed to mess around with a 45-year-old secretary, I'll never understand. My cell phone rang at 10:20, and I turned it off. Once the ball started rolling, Harvey's 5 operatives began delivering thick paper envelopes to the actual spouses of every company employee. Some had photos, some had video recordings, and all received detailed reports that could be used in divorce proceedings. Henry Thomas's wife got an especially large envelope. Others just received letters informing them of what was happening at Watson, in case they wanted to have a heart-to-heart with their spouses when they got home. Each letter included a short note saying, "In the interest of full disclosure, you can thank Jeannie Baxter for bringing this to our attention." I wondered how many friends my cheating wife would have on Tuesday morning. Watson disappeared almost overnight. My lawsuit against the company was followed by at least 20 more. Divorces spread through the office like wildfire. Even some marriages where we never found evidence of cheating didn't survive. Management tried to fire anyone tainted by the scandal, only to face their own involvement in the mess. Those who were innocent left almost as quickly, hoping to preserve their own reputations. The press got wind of the debacle, and 2 weeks later, there was an article about the firm featuring the phrase "work spouses." I wonder where they got that from. I bet it was just some crazy husband who didn't understand how the real world works. Shortly after, the business collapsed, and the office closed within 2 months. The office building remained vacant for almost a year. In the end, I did meet with Jeannie in my lawyer's office. She cried a lot. After weeks of angry messages mixed with denials, pleading requests, and bizarre attempts at bribery and negotiation, she finally took some responsibility for her situation. She said she got caught up in the excitement and culture of high finance. I don't know what sleeping with her colleague had to do with finance, but it was definitely part of the culture. The apologies didn't last long, and eventually, she said that part of it was my fault for not discussing my problems with her. Yes, apparently, it was my fault. What nonsense. You shouldn't have to remind your spouse not to sleep with her work husband. Most importantly, you shouldn't have to remind your spouse that she shouldn't have a damn work husband at all. I never truly understood Jeannie's infidelity, and she never adequately explained it to me. All I know is that she changed. The clear-eyed and seemingly truthful girl interested in business turned into a deceitful and highly dishonest cheat who seemed to live by the motto, "If he doesn't know, it won't hurt him." Harvey told me they only met on Wednesdays during lunch. They didn't use my absence that weekend as an opportunity to meet. It seemed she had some strange sense of a double marriage that limited her cheating but didn't eliminate it. Harvey tried to explain to me that, in his opinion, it was some kind of perverted bonding ritual. At Watson, a depraved corporate culture had developed where team building meant sleeping with your colleagues. There was even a twisted form of loyalty in this game. where employees only had sex with one person, usually the one they worked most closely with. Harvey thought they believed they were simply smarter and better than everyone else. Whether it was a shared secret that led to a risk they took together or a distorted social contract, I never understood. I would like to say that I also stopped caring, but I never stopped caring about my marriage to Jeannie or the circumstances that led to our divorce. I could have spent my life trying to understand these people, or I could just walk away. I chose the latter. I got my revenge, but it didn't turn out quite as I had planned. I won my lawsuits, but the company's accounts were empty, and Henry Thomas lost nearly everything in the divorce. My own actions made the company and Thomas incapable of paying the lawsuits against them. How's that for irony? My wife lost her job and demanded alimony when I divorced her. My lawyer argued that her unemployment was a direct result of her infidelity, which led to the divorce, and she didn't get any alimony. Even the cheated-on spouses resented me for ruining their lives with the unpleasant truth. It seemed they blamed me almost as much as their cheating spouses. It's a big city. I can live without their love, but I didn't foresee this happening. One affected spouse surprised me more than the others. One evening, Sheila Thomas approached me at a bar. She was stunningly attractive, which should have been more than enough for any man. I was still nursing my first beer. She introduced herself, sat next to me, and placed her hand on my crotch. Well, she had my attention. I'm divorcing my husband, but I want even more revenge. I want to tell him I slept with his plaything's husband. Will you help me do that, Mr. Baxter? How about it, Jake? Will you defile me and help me humiliate the man who slept with your wife? I wasn't sure what to think about the word humiliate, but I decided to help her, and I did everything I could until late into the night. I told you I had been sleeping in the guest room for 2 weeks before serving my wife, so I deserved some compensation. That night I felt dehydrated and had to drink water every hour. As Sheila left early the next morning, she said she was heading home to rub this in her husband's face. I reminded her that she had rubbed it in my face earlier in the night, and I'd love to have it rubbed in my face again. She laughed and promised I soon would. Jeannie's family was furious with me for a while, so I sat them down and showed them the video. They cried, apologized, and cried some more, but not as much as before. In the end, they didn't blame me for the divorce, though they tried to convince me to give her a second chance. I couldn't. There was no forgiveness in me, and I couldn't recall her ever asking me to forgive her. She had turned my heart to stone, and it stayed that way for over a year. At some point during the divorce, when I was telling my friends at work what had happened, it dawned on me how all my skills had failed me when it came to catching my cheating wife. I'm an expert in high-tech electronics, yet I caught her through a sandwich in a parked car, a bribe to a bellhop, and a few tiny video cameras you can buy online. I also thought about how easily they were caught and how easily they could have hidden it. I overheard 2 conversations, and that was enough. Everything was in plain sight. The couples crossing the street didn't even try to hide their involvement in the affairs. Such arrogance. As they say in the suburbs, what would the neighbors think? People must have known. It's almost a miracle they got away with it for so long. I started to wonder if the world I live in has any resemblance to the world around me. Is everyone doing this? Where I worked, anyone who called themselves a player was unmarried and only dated their right hand. And I realized I was once again sitting at the geeks table, trying to understand the cool kids. I do see Jeannie from time to time on the streets or in stores. I don't stop to talk to her, and I don't know what she's doing. When she sees me, she looks like she wants to cry. I never look at her for long. The sight of her still breaks my heart. I turn away, and she knows better than to approach me. I am no longer the man she married. The life I knew is gone, and I am starting over. As I said, I lit the fuse and blew it up. I had no idea the shrapnel would tear my own heart to pieces.